Good morning, Tahitia.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, let me just put it this way. Well, you know what? I expect any second now for my dog to start barking because the trash collectors are coming down the street. So get prepared for that. Welcome to MT Fridays. We are your hosts, Melonya and Tahitia, and today we are having unscripted conversations, filling the brain drain, one unscripted conversation at a time. And so let's start with what we're talking about today. I'm going to hand the mic over to you, Tahisha.
Woo! So before, when we were backstage, Melania and I were actually talking about the fact that it's been a wild week. There would be so much to choose from, right? Like, what do we even pick? But I decided to kind of talk about Ezra Klein has a article out in the New York Times. It's an opinion article called "Don't Believe Him." And really what it's about how fast everything has happened in the administration. The past, how many days has he been in office? I don't even, what is it, like
2 million years.
2 weeks maybe? But, anyways, so it's about how, just how fast it's happened and how this happens to, distract us, the chaos of all this, and it made me think about, and I wrote some notes as I was looking at it, what's been coming out is it's kinda like that chaos, you feel overwhelmed, fight or flight. Banyan called it muscle velocity. Steve Banyan, when he talked about this years ago.
Muzzle philosophy.
Muzzle, yeah,
Mhm.
muzzle
Yeah.
velocity. I don't know why I said muscle like it was a clam, but muzzle velocity, and so I would love to talk about that because we are right in the thick of that and the application of that principle, and I think you can call it a lot of different things, but it's it's pretty much relying on our psychological and behavioral piece that says, when we get inundated with a whole bunch of information, we get overwhelmed and we decide to choose kind of what we're going to focus on. And I know in Banyan's muzzle velocity, when he described it, it was like you throw three things at them, you throw as much stuff, and
Yeah.
only one thing's really going
We're
to
just
stick. Okay.
introducing our topics now,
Yes.
Denise.
I know. It's just so wild. Okay, I'm done.
All right. My topic today is the deafening silence that I feel is going on among the American public. I just think that in a coup there should be some noise, and I'm very surprised, astounded, bewildered by the business as usual approach that we're taking to this hostile takeover. So there we have it.
I mean, is it hostile? Many I read that he has the highest approval rating, right now. Uh,
I've read the opposite,
well, I read he is having the highest approval rating for him, okay? So I wanna context that a little bit,
but it's still the lowest.
well, it's the lowest, but it's the highest for him compared to his last time he was in office, which is interesting because I feel like he's done so much more in these past 2 weeks. You would think he would be at the lowest
What was
ever,
it,
but he's
47%?
not.
I think that's what it was, which is the lowest.
Yeah, and it depends on which it depends on which one you're looking at, but they're all kinda he's low for, in office sitting president, but he's high for him, which is so weird. He's higher than he was when he was elected last time, during this time period. Now, who knows what will happen weeks from now, but
Mm.
it
Are-
does say that either we are in, what Ezra Klein was talking about in the Times, this sorta I don't know what comes next kind of feeling, and we can't even process it to be like, "I don't like this yet," because 'cause we're so overwhelmed, or, no, it's business like usual, and, no one really cares, and no one's participating in the process, which I hope isn't the case. I hope we were just overwhelmed right now.
So let's dig into
Maybe not.
let's dig into Israel Pound here. No, Israel
Yes.
Pound, is that his name? Isn't that a
No, no,
writer?
Ezra Klein. Ezra
Klein.
Klein.
Okay, I'm like, isn't he
Ezra
dead?
Pounds is a is a different. Stop trying to trick me with confusing names. So basically, the opinion article is called "Don't Believe Me," and there's like a video that goes with it, and like, I'll be honest, I didn't read the whole article. I did watch. Look at it, I see the smirky smile. I did watch the video, and
Mhm.
I watched a couple of other videos and read some articles about, like, because I was like, "What is muzzle/muzzle
That's
velocity?"
what is happening now.
Yes, and, I think without knowing the name of it, I've done something similar in business practice where, like, you have a proposal or you go and you make a bid on something and you throw everything at them and you just hope they'll like something. Well, like, it's a very sales tactic, right? Like, I'm gonna show up with all my crap, and out of those things, I probably know the thing that you want, but if I inundate you with a whole bunch of things, you're only gonna be able to, like, accommodate in your headspace, like, one thing and fixate on that. So it is interesting to see this applied to politics as a strategy to get media shut down. Because if you're looking at, having complete control of government or being able to move forward, um, without obstruction, you wanna have some media control and control the narrative, and so if you give them a lot of things, like, what am I gonna choose? Like, every morning, who else feels like it's breaking news? Like, another plane, another executive order, another country that is having chaos, us getting rid of employees. I think he fired, like, 9,800 people from the US aid department because he's only keeping like 200. So if there's 10,000, that means close to 10,000 people got fired if you only keep the bare minimum. And it's just interesting what he's going after because a lot of the things that he's actively getting rid of so quickly are things that most of the general American public doesn't know a lot about. And so, as putting that as part of that plan of like, I'm going to throw a whole bunch of things at you, it it does become confusing. Like, what am I supposed to prioritize as the American public, not just the media, which is struggling to figure out what to share or what to communicate? Because we can't read it all, right? I mean, we could.
Mm.
I don't know if I would want that job. Would you want that job?
What
Like,
job is that?
all the stuff, you have to read it every day. You're a doom scroller, and that's your job.
Well, I guess I have a new job. I'm not getting paid for it though.
Oh I wonder if that's a if is that a job one could get paid for, doom scrolling?
Well, if so, I think I have expertise in it, and I will submit my resume.
I see, I'm not going to because I feel sometimes after, like, looking up all this, like, you start with one article and then you go, "Oh, well, what is that?" And, like, you go deeper into it. I find the deeper I dig, the more I'm like, "Ugh, what are we even doing on this planet?"
Well, it's funny because part of that strategy is about and I've been saying this all along. It's about distraction, right? It's about this distraction, and while you're being distracted by, oh my God, we're going to take over Gaza. Oh my God, we just fired 9,000 people. Oh my God, Elon Musk is going through all of our private information. Oh my goodness, we just put in this Voight guy who is the author of the Project 2025,
2025, yeah.
who is now going to head the Office of OBM, which is the Office of Budget Management, or OMB, Office of Management Budget, who controls all the money, right? And will decide what gets funded and what doesn't. While all of that, you've got to really tune into what you really should pay attention to. You should pay attention to who is and even as hard as it is to believe, Trump himself is a distraction,
Mm.
right? And while your gaze is upon him, the people who are really controlling him are the folks who are pulling the strings, right? And those are the richest people that you don't even know their names, right? Those are the folks that are really pulling the strings here. And so while we're chasing a razor, a laser with a cat, you know how you play with a laser with the cat, right? While the cat is chasing the laser, right? There's other things that are going on that are much more sinister. And we're not being paying attention to it. And today's media outlets are basically state run at this point, right? And so
Yeah.
you're not going to get that kind of real focus.
And, some have begun to point out that really it is a chipping away at the checks and balances that were in place with this three. So if you think about when you were in school as a kid in grammar school, we had the executive, the judicial, um, and what's the third one? Congress and senator in it. What's the name of it? I don't know.
Well, you have Congress, you have the judicial, and you have the executive branch, the three branches of government.
Okay. So it's just called Congress? Is that what it's called?
I can't
I'm trying
remember.
to remember the song of the checks and see, the only way I've learned anything is through cartoons, like, in the '80s,
And maybe,
and,
and maybe
like
that's why we are where we are.
it could be. My generation, Generation X, obviously effed everything, fucked everything up for everybody because all of our knowledge about government comes from Schoolhouse Rock and cartoons and Saturday morning nonsense and textbooks. My
Well, the
textbook said
Schoolhouse
that
Rock was not
listen,
nonsense. That was
it
good.
wasn't
Okay.
nonsense, but it lied to me right now,
It's
okay?
legislative, executive, and judicial. Those are the three branches: legislative,
See, I knew it
executive, and
wasn't
judicial.
Congress. I just couldn't remember. The song was not in my head where the Bill's walking up the anywho. Um,
We should be
I
playing those commercials now.
we should be playing those commercials now because it would be a refresher because the executive branch, my understanding, which is where the president sits, is not supposed to have complete power like he has. Like, obviously, he's using executive orders, which I believe was outlined in Project 2025 as a way to push things forward in with almost like a king authority to push these things forward. They're not exactly bills or laws. They're like the president decided it's an executive order and we're going to push forward. What could happen is the judicial side is supposed to check that by possibly like saying like, hey, you can't do that. That violates the Constitution, which I don't know if the Constitution is back up yet. I haven't checked, but it's interesting that one can't see the Constitution up on the U.S. Gov site, but they're supposed to step in and check the executive branch. And in certain cases, Congress, the legislative branch, is also supposed to have some power to check that. And we're noticing as he's appointing these cabinet and committee people and people in official offices, they're not really saying no. And he's just coming in and saying, like, this is the new presidency. And so, as a public, what does it say to us that we have a president who's more like a dictator, who's literally saying, well, I decided we're going to do this and nobody's standing in his way? Where I thought naively, because I watched way too much Schoolhouse Rock, that when he said, like, hey, I'm
Well,
going to
we'll
do
blame it on
this,
Schoolhouse Rock. Okay, no, it's
listen,
no, it's not.
I'm an American. I need to blame
No,
someone.
well, then
And
blame the
so in this
American
case,
people.
it's
Blame the
going
American people. Okay, that don't because that was probably we can still sing those songs, and it taught us how our government worked. But the American people have opted out of the we the people part of this democracy, and so when you opt out as the people, then you get this.
well, I also wonder because he's taking such an authoritative lead and he's doing things that some judges have already said violate the Constitution, but it's just on such a massive amount that like they're struggling to keep up with filing lawsuits, right? And like calling these things out. And lawsuits are slow, like injunctions are slow. The federal judge who paused, or there's been a pause on the freeze, some of those monies still have not been released that were frozen. So that pause on freezing federal funds, like, it's also showing that he doesn't necessarily have to do what the judges tell him to do, because he's still been pushing some things forward that, have been questioned or have been put on hold or have pending injunctions before he can do them. So what does it say to this? Maybe we were living in a very sort of idealistic world where we thought, hey, we're following the rules. The rules don't have to be followed, right? Like, we follow laws and rules because we feel some internal need to do that. But in reality, he doesn't. I mean, what really is stopping him?
Well, I think one of the things that this presidency and in the previous previous administration and presidency have shown us, because I thought, if there's one thing I can say that's a positive about him, is that because he has violated so many of the norms, and he's shown how has reminded us that this is the way government is supposed to work. A lot of our government and the office of the presidency was in the powers of the presidency were built on the president actually just doing the right thing,
Mm.
right? But he found loopholes around that, and then the legislative branch, seeing after those, the loopholes that were in that allowed someone who is not in that position, who is not scrupulous, who is what's the word, unscrupulous, who's not honest, right? How they can get around things. They did nothing to patch those gaps, right? And so for me, and I've been feeling overwhelmed, and I wake up in the middle of the night and I find myself picking up my phone and trying to, find out what terrible thing has happened, since I fell asleep 3 hours ago. And I think it's just important for, the days of us being uninformed. Like I was I have a part-time training management position, and I was talking to my manager, who is a white woman, and who, she was like, well, I'm kind of trying to, she asked how I was doing, and I told her the truth. And she goes, well, I've kind of been trying to bury my head, in the sand. And I thought to myself, wow, what a privilege to be able to bury your head in the sand. Because
Mhm.
we were talking, we passed each other in the hall, and she goes, how are you? I'm like, yeah, I'm hanging in there. And she said, I asked her how she was. She goes, well, stress, work stress, but not, my personal life is good, but work stress. And then we talked one-on-one later that day. And she said, I've kind of been burying my head in the sand. And I said to her, I said, well, I thought, well, aren't you lucky that your only stress is at work, right? But that's privilege. That's
It is
really privilege,
privilege.
because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, you're still white. You're second in command in this hierarchy of our country, right? You've got the second most power underneath white men. And at the end of the day, you will be impacted. Your civil liberties will be impacted. But you know what? But you'll be more protected than somebody that looks like me, right? Or and how privileged you are to understand that this country has allowed uh, 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 undocumented immigrants to work in this country. Right now, you notice that they're pulling the immigrants, but not at all going after the people that hired them. They're still safe. They broke the law too, right?
Mm.
Right.
That's a really valid point.
We
I
don't-
also I also want to say that when you start to think about how it's slowly dismantling the rights of citizens who already live here and have gained rights. Um, it's an interesting it's an interesting time to be in the US. Part of me wants to leave and part of me wants to stay because I don't want to be forced from the country that I was born into, that holds so much promise for so many of us, that for many, like, I still kind of think about the idea of the Statue of Liberty. My grandparents came through Ellis Island. Um, because, and if for some who don't know this, I'm half Jewish, and my grandfather fought in World War One, and my grandfather fought in World War Two. I mean, we're a people who have given our lives and blood and sweat and tears to build this nation since the 1880s and before. Like, I can trace my ancestry to slavery days in South Carolina. I can trace my Jewish heritage to Ellis Island and coming through. So when I think about leaving, because we have a administration that wants to look at people like me and say, you did not build this country, it breaks my heart that I also feel like and this is probably part of that muzzle velocity, right? I'm inundated every day with things that I can't choose which one is the most important for me to focus on. I'm so exhausted that I'm about to give up and be like, no, I don't want to stay here. I don't want to be here. But what happens to this country when we leave? Like, what happens if we do leave this country or we break away or we decide, like, I don't want to put up with this anymore? What happens to the people that remain? And I do think the Northeast is probably hit the hardest with the federal employee layoffs, because if you think about DC and where it's located, we're probably going to see a bigger impact for that. I'm sure there's families where I know so many people where somebody worked in the federal government and they got a letter asking them either to resign or like they were going to be fired. And the federal government jobs, and someone tell me if I'm wrong, but government jobs used to be some of the most stable jobs that you could get in this country. It was like you went through the requirements for a government job, which is much different than getting hired in the private sector. And you knew that this was an employer that you could probably stay with until you retired. For like those jobs that are from the cradle to the grave, right? Like your first job to the time you end. How many people know federal workers who have been in place for decades? And I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but it was a part of our culture too. Like, I want us to think about culture too as not just, we like to think about culture as a very ethnic thing or like racial thing or about sex, but it's also about work culture. And there is a culture of like federal employees and government and state employees. There's a culture that's assumed with that. And I know when I thought about, government jobs, and I'm going to throw police in there too. Hello, police are government employees. And I want police to also think about this administration doesn't care about you too, because we saw them release from January 6th people who violently attacked police. So if you care about police, you would not have let those people go. You would not support attacks on anyone who's like sitting in that position, because I'll admit it, it's a dangerous job. So he's not for police either. He's not for veterans, like, or not he, but the administration or Project 2025, because they're not for anything that gives back to society. They're not for social programs. And there is, I saw something the other day, and he was talking about how Western countries have gone into third world countries or countries with resources and basically taken what they have, destabilized their government, And the first thing they sort of do is they get rid of like government serving the people. And so as we're getting rid of all these programs internally, it's like we're following the model that we have applied in other countries. Get rid of their access to communication, get rid of their access to seeing government as a supportive government, make them feel like they're out here on their own, struggling, fighting amongst their peers to get the scraps that are left behind. Um, and so is this where we wanna be? And I'm gonna throw this out. What are the ways that you could get rid of a sitting administration? Like, is there a 90-day trial period that we don't know about? Did somebody not read, and I'm being facetious here, obviously, but did someone not read the, like, warranty thing for president? And maybe in the fine print it says, "If you're not satisfied in 90 days, fill out a form and we can get rid of this administration." I know that doesn't exist, but it feels like for something this important, that should be a thing. Like, where is my warranty on government? Does that exist?
No,
I can get it from my phone.
it's very interesting, and I'll be honest with you. I'm really starting to hate the word interesting because I say it a lot. I hear it a lot. It seems
I
like
say it a
that's
lot.
the word that of the day.
It's
But
better than tremendous.
you said what?
I
Horrendous
said it's better than tremendous.
or horrendous?
Tremendous. There's someone else who says everything is tremendous.
No,
I'm being facetious.
I'm thinking horrendous. Well, that's horrendous. You know what? Actually, that's the new word I'm going to start to use. Instead of saying, "Well, that's interesting," I'm going to say, "Well, that's horrendous," right?
Well, because we've been socialized to be nice. So
Well,
interesting has taken on the phrasing of also like that sucks, that's
well,
awful.
but
I don't
also
have a
too,
word for that.
but
That's gibbly gop.
if you are a person that pays attention to, I pay attention to global and national events. I have all of my life, right? And so, from a very objective point of view, this is a very interesting time in history, right? It's interesting because we are in the midst of history. We are in the midst, and if you listen to someone like a Richard Wolff, who is an economist and a professor. He will clearly outline where we are as a nation, and we are in a nation in a decline on the global stage, right? And I don't think a lot of folks understand and realize that. I know that people don't, they don't really understand um, what is going on. And I think there were two groups of people who supported this current president. Those who were very rich and knew that, when you stop to think about all of the cuts and all of the money that is not being put into to current programs, that is only being done to make it possible to give an unprecedented tax cut for people who have more money than they can ever spend in a lifetime, right? And that is what that base supported, right? That's what they supported, and some of those things are things that they actually have paid into, right? And while all of this is going on, we are still not addressing the fact that looming in the drop in the background is the fact that we have more debt as a nation than any other nation on the planet. And at some point, that is going to collapse and it's going to come due, right? And the more we become unstable as a nation, I have a feeling that that is going to usher in that next step that is going to be detrimental to our economy, but also the global economy. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's BRICS in the background, right? Because they're setting up their own
So
economy.
for those who don't know, can you define
BRICS is
BRICS?
Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Africa are forming an economic group
Alliance?
alliance, and
That's
they're
been going on for a few, like, pre-20 pre-COVID, actually, that's been going on.
right. But in more and more countries are joining BRICS. I mean, up to maybe 23 countries or whatever. So while you have the G7, right, which are 7 countries, now you've got this other, and they're going into countries that were ignored.
Yeah.
Brazil, excuse me, and also while we are campaigning on DEI and cutting our civil rights. And understand, when you cut civil rights, you're not just cutting civil rights for Black people, you're cutting your own civil rights, because when Black people march, they march for everyone, right? And so, with that being said, while we are mired in racism, the other global economic alliance are partnering with some of the brownest people on the planet: Africa, Brazil, China, India.
Resource rich countries when it
Resource rich
comes
countries.
to the technological world coming, right? Because the resources are changing. Copper used to be plentiful and not something that, you could find it in people's houses, right? Copper is i- necessary for our technology. So that makes it, even in some cases, more valuable than diamonds, right? So if you look at where they're looking to make alliances, it is the countries that have resources to build the technology that we're going to use in the future. And we don't necessarily have those resources here in the United States, nor are we looking at, at partnering in meaningful ways with countries that do have those
Well, that's why he's
recesses.
going after Greenland.
Well, yes, but I would say like Greenland's a bit of a lift for us, and like it's so preposterous versus creating a collaborative practice or alliance. And because BRICS is not like, I'm going to invade you and take your resources. It is alliance between these countries. So why would you not think about, well, what alliances could I make, versus telling places like Canada and Mexico, I'm going to tariff you, or you can become the 51st state. I thought the 51st state was going to be Puerto Rico, to be honest, not Canada. I thought they were a country, not a state, but what do I know? I learned everything from Schoolhouse Rock. So
Stop blaming Schoolhouse Rock.
that's my theme today.
Well, it's funny because it's really that, I find in these days and times that it's really very difficult to find levity. I've noticed that I've been getting in prior to, the last year or so, I looked at social media. I'm a shy person. I was just explaining that to Tahitia. I'm shy. I'm an introvert. And I only open my mouth if I think I actually have something that's worth listening to. And social media is just about just nonstop, just information. Some of it is so trivial and vapid that it's not even worth your time. But I was always an observer, more of an observer on social media than I was a participant. Now I am a participant. And I'm out there talking. I think that's in terms of the silence, right? I'm out there.
Mhm.
This is the information that we need to have these days, in these times. And I'm also just noticing, like, if I go on something like LinkedIn, right, there's a few people who were in the DEI space right before, who are still carrying that banner, right? But it's still, I find myself, last week we've talked about cognizant dissonance. I find myself like, wow, the only thing that we're starting to miss is the roundup of people. Well, we are rounding up
Stop
undocumented.
stop encouraging stuff that to happen sooner.
I'm not
Or
encouraging. I'm saying that, you know what? It's time for, you cannot bury your head in the sand. And I've been screaming this for a long time. When I talk about the surveillance, when I talk about AI, I mean, we are conditioning ourselves to be fed information, not to be seekers of knowledge, not to be able to be critical thinkers, not to be creative, but to sit in front of a screen and have information that is going to be curated to enslave us, right? To keep us dull. I mean, if though the day, you know what, if you stay in this country, then you goddamn it better start fighting. You better start utilizing of the power of the people, because we do have power. See, the thing is, when COVID hit, employees for the first time in the history of this country actually had power, and corporations didn't like it. And so they are making certain that we know we will no longer have the power that was seen during that time, right? You notice that corporations are quite quiet. They're not saying anything, right? And now the president is trying to put into place to criminalize private sector companies that do any kind of DEI. Okay.
Which companies should be afraid of, because
They shouldn't be afraid. They should
no,
have
no,
a
no.
plan.
I'm gonna say companies should be afraid of that type of so companies should be afraid of the fact that the government is looking at private companies and saying, like, I'm going to enforce rules. That seems not the way that the US has historically functioned. And I'm thinking of Costco. I think you're thinking of Costco too.
I'm thinking of
They
dog.
got a letter or saying like they need, or something was announced to them that they needed to sort of shift away from their DEI programs. And they said no, that wasn't going to happen. They were moving forward. There's lots of companies that are moving forward, private companies that are still committed and moving forward. But
Here's the thing. So again, because when you're not taught history, then then this is all new to you, right? So so you notice that you're starting to use the language that DEI is illegal, right? So
well,
now
it's you can't make a thought illegal.
look, I'm telling you, you know
No, I
what? See, that's
know.
the problem. That's
See,
the
you and I
problem.
disagree.
This is the
We
problem with
disagree on
you
this.
intellectuals. You want to argue shit on an intellectual level, and they're not doing the intellectual thing. Okay, they're doing something by a very different rule book, and the rule book is there are no rules. Okay, so you want stay intellectual if you want to, and mince words if you want to, while you are living in fascist United States where people are doing the Heil Hitler salute. Come on now.
I I am not saying that all of this is not happening, but I also know, or I don't know, but I think that yes, we do have power, but we have the power of our dollars too. I'm
Yes.
already seeing information out there that says that boycotts and I hate to say boycotts because boycotts tend to benefit the bad, or not the bad, but the alternative manufacturer. But anywho, Walmart's lost money, Google's lost money, Amazon's lost money, Target has lost money. These companies that have
Tesla's lost
decided
money
to Tesla's lost money. They didn't
globally.
really, like, let me just say, they didn't really have a DEI program. In fact, they were
No.
probably one of the reasons why DEI thoughts and philosophies around employment and hiring probably had the biggest like kind of the biggest target for them might have been tech groups, because there was just so much rampant anti-women practices. I'm not even going to say anti-Black practices, but anti-women practices at tech companies, meaning like how many women were in STEM. And so when you think about DEI and people like think about it, oh, DEI should be illegal. DEI, like you can't make illegal the concept and the idea that we should have fair practices at work, because someone's going to think that anyways, regardless of whether you make DEI like you can't say it. Someone sitting at their desk is going to wonder if, wait, let me finish this thought. is going to wonder if I'm sitting at my desk and my colleague is Jim, and Jim and I get to talking, and Jim, because we've become friendly, says to me, "Yeah, it really sucks that they only pay us like $75,000." And I look at Jim and I'm like, "You get 75 and we both got hired at the same time, but I'm a woman." And I go, "I get 40." And that is my moment of thinking, wow, this is so unfair. I'm being paid unfairly. And that is how a lot of these thoughts about, like, hey, if I'm doing the same job and you're doing the same job, and we both got hired at the same time, and we both have similar experience, why am I getting paid less? That is a concrete tied to the image. That's that's straight data. And that makes me think this is unfair. Getting rid of the phrase DEI is not going to stop people from coming to that conclusion. And that's what companies and government want you to think. They want you to think, if we get rid of this, people won't be thinking about the fairness of the workplace. They won't be thinking about the fairness of their lives, because they won't have this concept and this way to tie it to words and easy phrases, because we love easiness, right? Like, I can just say, well, this is not fair from DEI. But no, I would come to that conclusion anyways. So get rid of DEI. That's fine. Call it something else. That's fine. People are still going to come to these same conclusions. They just won't have something to anchor it on. And
And
it's
they
going to
won't,
take them longer because we're starting all over
and
again.
they won't have the legal protections because they're dismantled.
But that doesn't come from DEI, though. That
No,
comes from affirmative action, the Civil Rights Act of 64.
what I'm saying is that once they
And
come
we're
to
getting
that,
rid of those.
and once you come to that conclusion, see, all of this is being built on the fact that they love uneducated people. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I've come to that conclusion. Oh, Jim
Yes.
is making more money. Jim and I have the same credentials. Jim and I were hired at the same time. Jim is making what, $15,000 more than I, or
He's
however.
making $30,000
30,
more
no,
than
30,
me.
30. See, I don't,
35.
me and math
I'm
ain't
making
going.
40 and he's making 75.
He's making, so he's making
Almost twice as much.
almost twice as much. And now that I have that information, what do I do with it? Nothing, because the protections that you had previously are no longer there.
And here's the thing about the Jim and me situation, right? So we are also conditioned and told that workplace culture involves not talking about salaries, not talking about what we do, because that's just, that's not polite. That's not good behavior at work. Why don't we talk about salaries? Why aren't we transparent with that? Because they don't want you to know that the clearest line of inequality and the clearest example of mistreatment is your salary. If you don't talk about salary with your colleague, you will never know, because a lot of times we are, and we have something in the chat. A lot of times we're just oblivious to what our colleagues are making, and we don't ask because that's not polite and proper.
What's
That
in the
is not. So what's in the chat? It says, to Melania's point. Let me read this. I'm gonna put it. Can I float it? How do I do that? I remember. What did I do? There's an overlay. To Melania's point, civil rights actions were revoked in the orders, including for contractors complying with civil rights law. From Dr. Harry Petaway.
Hello, Dr. Harry Petaway. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you for participating.
Yeah. Again, and here's the frightening part about all of this, and we've got to move past the scare and the bewilderment. I've seen that in comment sections. Oh, I'm just bewildered. Don't be, because the time for being afraid and bewildered is absolutely over. Now is the time for action. I think that, we have economic power where economically, this country is run on us being consumers. We stop being consumers, and then, it also is based on labor, right? And there's some folks out there, it's a really very there's that horrendous time because it's difficult to determine how much information do you put out there in terms of your plans, right? How much do you, and how do you mount a a resistance to Melonia's point. Civil rights actions were
I
revoked
was just throwing it up.
in the orders. Thank
I
you.
figured out how to do that.
Contractors complying with civil rights law. Right.
If anyone wants to volunteer and help us run controls, because we obviously don't do it well.
Thank you, doctor. Yes. So, here's the problem is that, once you concede power, how do you get it back? Right. And folks, again, I think there were two groups of folks that voted for this. One, the people who were very rich and very powerful and wanted more money or more or more money and power, and those who were, stoked in hatred and fear, right? And those folks don't realize that the powers that are revoked from those who've come from marginalized communities also impact them. And the sweeping movement, that 900-page 2025 Project 2025 outlines some really horrendous things for women.
It did. But I want to I want to acknowledge the fact that we need to be more strategic, and we need to be much more thinking about, well, what is the future going to look like from a very business plan perspective? Like, I think that, and I'm naive in this way too. I think that we've often, and when I say we, I'm talking about a collective, like liberals and maybe like Democrats and people who see society a certain way, intellectuals, maybe. I think that we have been very polite and very, well, eventually people are going to figure it out. They're going to come to the logic. Like, maybe these are people who need to like experience, because I remember someone said to me, well, your son isn't going to like realize the value of X unless he experiences Y, right? And I think we enter a lot of situations thinking that, well, they've never experienced it. So once they experience the chaos of losing some of the things that kind of came from marginalized groups or came from these support systems from the government, then they'll realize exactly, what's at stake. Well, unfortunately, it's probably too late then, right? Like once everything gets through and passed and or the administration has a different level of power, it might be too late to use our voice as people in a non highly disruptive way, right? So, and by that I mean we need to be thinking about all potential plans. What does it look like if, states joined other countries? I don't know. I'm spitballing. What does it look like if states separate? What does it look like if he's impeached? What does it look like if he's arrested? What does it look like if there's a military coup and we end up with a military government? Anything at this point is possible. And I think like part of that muzzle velocity and all that stuff being thrown at you is you become so raw to like this chaos that nothing is a surprise. And you almost are just like, oh, well, this is.
Well, that's what it's supposed to do.
And you're the victims in this.
It's supposed to overwhelm you. But this is what
Yes.
I have been saying for quite some time, especially as an African American. We do not have representation. But here's the news flash. No American has representation, right? The only people, because we are and I've been saying this for some time now, we live in a plutocracy. The world is a plutocracy. A plutocracy is a governments run by the rich for the rich, right? That is who is being represented now. Our government is representing the oligarchs, not the everyday people of this country, right? And so I'm looking around now. Project 2025 was published and made available to Democrats, right? And they are just, I'll be honest with you, and I'm a very vocal person. I have gone on an email my representatives, and I've told them how I feel. I've told Schumer it's time for you to retire and take Nancy with you, because you have had access to this information, and yet and still they are floundering like it's their first day, right? What we hired them to be the leaders to represent our interests. I have noticed, like on Facebook, I just keep getting ads from from Democrats, to say, please donate so that we can fight. No, how about this? How about we've already paid your damn salary? How about you just do what you're supposed to do? And part of what you're supposed to do is to make certain that we remain safe. And so you had access to Project 2025. Now, at post inauguration, you're trying to figure out who's in charge. Nobody wants to step up into leadership. And let's also get this straight. They put Hakeem Jeffries, to head, what is the House of Representatives? He's the whatever his title is.
Is that the whip?
Yeah, he's and what's so funny is I thought to myself the other day is that they always slide Black folks into positions when there's absolute chaos and trouble. So when things don't work out, we've got somebody to blame, Hakeem, right? How much power does he have? And we know that Nancy Pelosi's in the back, right, still orchestrating stuff. Nancy Pelosi, who is a multi-millionaire.
I'm against capitalism, period. So, Democrat, Republican, centrist, whatever, like it corrupts, as evidenced by so much we see.
Well, the end game, there's no end game where the average person wins. And if you want to, and here's the thing. A lot of people feel that once these big business people, right, Trump, who, the Apprentice actually was a facade. It was a facade. The 85% in the middle and the global majority and all the marginalized groups should join the Republican Party and make the changes from within.
That
You
is
know
an
what? I had
interesting.
some friends.
That's
Thank you
like
for
the
that.
spook who sat by the door, right? Like, work from within, and then it changes government.
Yeah, but you know what? Here's the thing. I used to have, I have some friends for a long time, Black friends who were Republicans. Here's the thing. You'll just be ignored within their party. The point is you've got to get.
I'm going to disagree with you
Mhm.
on that, because I do think that both parties are too homogeneous right now. And there are very few in the parties, Democrat and Republican, who have differing opinions, or enough that have a sprinkling of differing opinions to not turn that group of the party to voting a singular way. It used to be, and this is probably how checks and balances really worked well, it used to be you had like a more mixed opinion in each party. Like it wasn't like, like the parties seemed to be owned by a singular theme. And that singular theme for both of them is the same. Who has money and who will buy me? Okay. There are very few in either party that would not be swayed by a bag full of money. And that's what I'm going to say to that. And I know we call it money towards your next election, but that's not what it is.
But here's to say, when I say silence, I mean this. There's evidence coming out that there were I don't want to misquote, but a considerable amount of Black votes, and this happens all the time, that are removed from the ballot for whatever reasons, right? So I don't trust any side, right? I would really love to see a real an independent come to the table that represents some of the, should we downsize the size of government? I believe we should. Is there waste? I believe there is, right?
Downsizing the government, I agree with that too. Unfortunately, it has to be planned,
It does.
because the chaos that will come out of this downsizing is so disruptive financially and fiscally to the United States.
To our protection. We are getting rid of seasoned FBI agents, right? We're having people, turn each other in, so to speak, right? And these are people who, and CIA agents or whatever. So you're going to, again, you want to talk about meritocracy. We're not filling those roles with people who are
Yeah, who
highly
just yeah.
specialized in those positions. We're putting people in those positions who will get what's the word I'm looking for? Who will bow down to the current administration. They don't have the type of credentials that are needed for those roles. So we are putting ourselves in economic danger, we're putting ourselves in global danger, and we're putting ourselves in physical danger. And now that we've got this rhetoric around Gaza, right? If we ignite, the possibility for terrorist attacks, because now we have poked that bear again, and now we're going to have people in positions that know how to track. But now, if you think a couple of years ago, I think it was from the FBI, they said one of the biggest threats to America is white supremacy. That was ignored. And look at where we are now. And so we are going to fill those intelligence agencies with people who are not equipped. We are putting ourselves in danger.
Well, and it's funny you called that out because that was unqualified applicants or unqualified people in positions or people without experience. That was what he blamed DEI for doing, right? As you're getting rid of a lot of people who have experience. So, and I'm talking about the flight that crashed. So it looks like probably that will be the scapegoat when things happen at these agencies. I know we're coming up to time, but I do want to just add a comment about the experience piece. And I want whoever is listening, whether that be on the rewind or now, to think about this. And I can only come from health because that's all I know. In a nursing unit, usually there are there's a mix of experienced nurses and new grads and new nurses, right? When you don't have that nice mix or you don't have a supervisor to rely on who has experience, that is when we have shown through research and data accidents and uh, patient care goes down, not just because they're overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that's coming through, but because they don't have experienced resources to help them through that. So, what does that say when you're looking at a government body that's following a model that simply says, I'm going to get rid of the fat? And whatever that fat looks like, and by when I'm saying fat, I mean those who are making a lot of money. Like, that's why they're offering early retirements or asking them to resign.
They
Those
won't
are
get that
some of the
one.
packages. Well, but what I'm saying is if you look strictly at dollar signs as a way to reduce your workforce, that gives you the worst evidence for reducing workforce. It should be like if you think about reduction, it should be strategic. It should be based on several different pieces that allow us to also have, a better mix of resources. And that's what equity and inclusion and diversity of the workforce would really look like, right? So
But I want, and I
I
think
would
you
not want to be taken care of by a bunch of first year grads
right.
who don't know what they're doing
And
without any sense of resource.
I think that the approach that, and I want to acknowledge, Dr. Harry. I think that there should be a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy. Some of the long-term strategy might be for some Northerners to move to some of these blue states, but you know what I mean. But then again, I
Red
mean
states.
these red states. But good Lord, can you withstand the prejudice that you're going to encounter there?
Can we go
Right?
as a caravan?
You know what
Can
I
it be
mean?
like what was that Oregon
But
Trail? I think his used to.
that might be a strategy. We wouldn't throw that out of the window, but nobody is really coming to this. A protest is to see people on the street. That's all well and good. That doesn't stop anything. Carrying your sign doesn't stop anything. What it does do is bolster our confidence that we are not alone in this fight. Yes, there are other people out there, and yes, that has to happen. But there has to be some other strategy that actually grinds this to a halt. And there is nobody leading that charge. There is nobody talking about strategy. There is nobody mobilizing us to do something that actually moves the needle and puts a stop on this. And so,
I think it's starting to happen.
starting and having a plan out the gate are
Well,
two
it has to
different
start.
things.
So we're
It should
hearing
have started
some.
before. What were the Democrats
Sh
doing?
You know what? Who cares? Honestly, who cares?
We should
Like,
care.
as long as we start. I don't care that you didn't start before, but if we
We
keep
should.
no, we need to
Yes.
focus. No, I disagree with you completely on
We
this.
can
We
do
need
two
to
things at the same
No,
time.
we cannot.
Yes, we
No,
can.
we cannot.
We can
And
so.
if Trump has shown us anything, we cannot. Muzzle velocity theory is all about the fact that really we can't do two things. We can't really multitask
They can.
well.
They
They
do.
No, 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 no. They need to focus on if we're starting, let's go. We can't be like, well, you should have done it this time and you
You
should
know
have
what?
done
I'm saying
we
that
just have to go.
from
We
a
have to
personal point.
go.
Well, I've been
We
talking
have
about
to
action
encourage
from day
them to
one.
go.
I've been
I know,
talking
but we
about
can't look
action.
in the back and say, "Well, where were you before?"
Well, I
Like,
can because I'm
they're
frustrated
starting.
right now. But
I
I've
get it.
also advocated and I've also used my platform to talk
We're
about
using
action.
we're using our last minute to fight with each other. I
Yeah,
love
yes,
it.
I love it. We
We're
can
in
agree
set
to
we're in
disagree.
we agree to disagree on this.
But whatever we do, we are in agreement that there
Yes.
needs to be action and
Yes,
strategy.
action.
That's what we're in agreement with.
Like, I'm just agreeing to the fact that, like, if they get going, I'm just happy they're going, okay? And I will join along, like, just someone stand up and go, and I know
Well,
that's scary because you might get killed. You might die. Most political leaders are assassinated when you look at models of third world countries. So I get why I would not wanna jump up and be like, "Yo, here I am, a target on my back." Like, the fact that the last president he issued presumptive, like, pardons for potential targets, that's a scary thought. And there's nothing that says that Trump has to follow that
no, it
anyways, these
doesn't.
pardons.
Yeah.
So,
Old school rules.
old
Old school
old
rules.
school rules, soap in a pillowcase.
I mean, just old school. Let's try to play by some stupid rules. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Well, thank you all, for joining us. If you join us on the rewind, please.
I want to go. Wait a second. I want to say one more thing. I know you're about to close us out, but I do want to say, like, have you heard of Beast Wars or Mr. Beast?
No.
Okay. So he's a YouTuber. He's really popular. He has millions, millions of followers. And he discovered something that he gives away a lot of money. And so he was trying to buy TikTok at one point. And he had so many investors to buy TikTok. And then he was trying to just give away like philosophy. Like, it was he wanted to help people. So he was trying to fundraise for a foundation to give away, supplies and resources to people who needed it. And he found that nobody wanted to fund that from his billionaire friends. And what he said was he was like, well, when it was for profit and I wanted to buy TikTok and it was all about making money, I had so many investors. But when I was like, hey, if you got a spare million from these billionaires, like, hey, do you want to throw it this way and we'll take care of some of these problems? Crickets. He said it was crickets. So I want to just tell you that because we talked about this so much. So yeah,
two resources. Generalstrikeus.com is something that you might want to check out. They are trying to mount a defense. Generalstrikeus.com. And you might also want to check out the Indivisible. They are also mounting some strategy because we need some at this point. Thank you so much thank you, Dr. Harry, for being with us and participating. Thank you all for your participation. We'll be back on next Friday, 9 a.m. See you, Tahitia.
See ya. Thanks for giving me 3 minutes
on
extra.
MT Fridays. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more insightful discussions every Friday. Remember, the brain drain stops here. So keep the conversation going by connecting with us on social media or visiting our website. Until next time, stay curious and keep filling your mind with knowledge. See you next week, Friday, on MT Fridays.